Yes, Donald Trump has committed many crimes, but that's not the reason why he's facing prosecution. So like Richard Nixon, Nixon was just like Richard Nixon, Trump is being punished for his sins against the dominant order, and not his most serious crimes. Now Donald Trump is now under indictment and facing four government-run investigations, three criminal and one civil, and is not being targeted because of his crimes, but nearly every serious crime that he's committed of carrying out has been committed by his political rivals. He is being targeted because he is deemed dangerous for his willingness, at least rhetorically, to reject the Washington Consensus regarding the democratic free market and the free trade policies, as well as the idea that the U.S. should oversee a global empire. He has not only belittled the ruling ideology, but he urged the sycophants to attack the apparatus that maintains the duopoly by declaring the 2020 election illegitimate, even though it wasn't. Um, the Donald Trump problem is the same as the Richard Nixon problem. Nixon was forced to resign under the threat of impeachment. And it wasn't for his involvement in war crimes and crimes against humanity, nor was it for his illegal use of the CIA and other federal agencies to spy upon, intimidate, harass, and destroy radicals, dissidents, and activists. Nixon was brought down because he targeted other members of the ruling political and economic establishment. And once Nixon, like Trump, attacked the centers of power, the media was unleashed to expose abuses and illegalities it had previously minimized or ignored. Um, Now, members of Nixon's re-election campaign illegally bugged the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee in the Watergate office building, and they were caught after they broke back into the offices to fix the listening devices. And Nixon was implicated in both the pre-election illegality, including spying on political opponents, as well as attempting to use federal agencies to cover up the crime. His administration maintained an enemies list that included well-known academics, actors, union leaders, journalists, businessmen, and other politicians. Now, back in 1971, the internal White House memo entitled Dealing with Their Political Enemies was drafted by White House counsel John Dean, whose job it was to advise the president or any squatter on the law. He described a projected design to use the available federal machinery to screw the public enemies. Um, Now, Nixon's conduct, and that of his closest aides, was clearly illegal and deserving of prosecution. He was facing 36 guilty verdicts or guilty pleas associated with the Watergate scandal 2 years after that break-in. But it was not the crimes Nixon committed abroad or against dissidents that secured his political execution, but the crimes he carried out against the Democratic Party and its allies, including in the establishment press. The political center was subjected to an attack with techniques that are usually reserved for those who depart from the norms of acceptable political belief. Noam Chomsky had wrote that in the New York Review of Books in 1973, a year before Nixon resigned. As Edward Herman and Chomsky pointed out in their book, Manufacturing Consent, The Political Economy of the Mass Media, the answer is clear and concise. Powerful groups are capable of defending themselves, not surprisingly, and by media standards, but it is a scandal when their position and rights are threatened. By contrast, as long as illegalities and violations of democratic substances are confined to marginal groups of dissident, victims of U.S. military attack, or they result in the diffuse cost imposed on the general population, media opposition is muted and absent altogether. This is why Nixon could go so far, lulled into a false sense of security, precisely because the watchdog only barked when he began to threaten the privileged. Now, what led up to the unraveling of Nixon's government, and what lies at the core of the attacks against Trump? And this is the fact that, like Nixon, Trump's targets included the rich and respectable, the spokespeople for official ideology, men who are expected to share power to design social policy and to mold popular opinion. As Chomsky noted about Nixon at that time, such people are not fair game for persecution at the hands of the state. This is not to minimize Trump's crimes. Trump nearly even in the polls with President Joe Biden in the 2024 presidential race appears to have committed several misdemeanors and serious felonies. Back in November of 2022, the Department of Justice appointed a special prosecutor to investigate Trump's retention of classified documents in his Mar-a-Lago home in Florida, and any potential criminal liability resulting from that act, as well as any unlawful interference with the transfer of power after the 2020 presidential election. Now, separately, a district attorney in Georgia is working with a special purpose grand jury with a special purpose grand jury in relation to Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election. Result: basically, a key piece of evidence is the notorious phone call between Trump and Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, in which the squatter kept insisting he needed more votes to be found, which They already had, even though basically Biden had won. Charges in this case could include conspiracy to commit election fraud, racketeering, and pressuring or threatening public officials. Now, the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, has now apparently indicted Trump for the $130,000 hush money payment that he made to former porn star Stormy Daniels, with whom Trump allegedly had a sexual relationship. This payment was misreported to the Trump Organization's records and is a legal retainer in violation of campaign finance laws. Finally, New York Attorney General Letitia James is bringing a civil lawsuit alleging that the Trump Organization had lied about its assets in order to secure bank loans. If the Attorney General's lawsuit is successful, Trump and other members of his family may be barred from doing business in New York, including buying property there for up to 5 years. Trump's alleged offenses should be investigated, but the cases involving Daniels and the retention of classified documents seem relatively minor, and frankly similar to those committed by Trump's political opponents. Last year, Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign and the Democratic National Committee agreed to pay fines of $8,000 and $105,000 respectively for mislabeling the $175,000 expenditure on opposition research. Now, namely, the long discredited Steele dossier as legal expenses. The improper retention of classified documents has typically resulted in a slap on the wrist when other politicians have been investigated. Now, Clinton, for example, had used private email servers instead of a government email account when she was Secretary of State. And the FBI concluded that she sent and received materials classified as top secret on her private server, but ultimately, FBI Director James Comey decided to decline to prosecute her. So basically, he never carried out prosecuting her for any crime. Now, Trump's former vice squatter Mike Pence and President Joe Biden had also had classified documents at their homes, but not as much as Trump did. And though we are told that this may have been inadvertent, but the discovery of these classified documents, rather than triggering outrage in most of the media, had initiated a conversation about overclassification. Former CIA Director David Petraeus was given 2 years probation and a $100,000 fine after he admitted to providing highly classified black books that contained handwritten classified notes about official meetings, war strategy, intelligence capabilities, and the names of covert officers to his lover, Paula Broadwell, who was also writing a fawning biography of Petraeus. As this was the case with Nixon, the most serious charges Trump may face involve his attack on the foundations of the two-party duopoly, especially undermining the peaceable transfer of power from one branch to the other. In Georgia, Trump could face very serious criminal charges with potentially lengthy sentences if convicted. And likewise, if the federal special prosecutor indicts Trump for unlawful interference in the 2020 election, we won't know until any indictments are made public. And yet the most egregious of Trump's actions while in office either received minimal media coverage, and they were downplayed or lauded as acts carried out in defense of democracy and the U.S.-led international order, even though that's not the case. And why hasn't Trump been criminally investigated for the act of war he committed against Iran and Iraq when he assassinated Iranian General Qasem Soleimani and 9 other people with the drone strike in Baghdad airport? Iraqi Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi condemned the strike and told his parliament that Trump lied in order to get Soleimani exposed in Iraq as part of the peace talks between Iraq, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. Iraq's parliament passed a resolution demanding that all foreign troops leave the country, which the U.S. government proceeded to reject. And why not prosecute or impeach Trump for pressuring his first Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, to lie and say that Iran wasn't complying with the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, known as the Iran nuclear deal? Trump ultimately fired Tillerson and resumed unilateral, devastating, and illegal act sanctions against Iran in violation of international law and quite possibly domestic U.S. law. Why wasn't Trump impeached for his role in the ongoing attempts to engineer a coup and overthrow the democratically elected president of Venezuela? Trump declared previously unknown right-wing politicization and would-be coup leader Juan Guaido to be the true Venezuelan president, and then legally handed him control of the Latin American country's U.S. bank accounts. The legal U.S. sanctions that facilitated this coup attempted to have blocked food, medicine, and other goods from entering the country and prevented the government from exploiting and exporting its own oil, devastating the economy. Over 40,000 people died between 2017 and 2019 due to these sanctions. According to the Center for Economic and Policy Research, that figure is certainly higher now. Now, Nixon, like Trump, was not impeached for his own worst crimes. He was never charged for directing the CIA to destroy the Chilean economy and back a far-right military coup that overthrew the democratically elected left-wing government of Salvador Allende. Nixon wasn't brought to justice for his illegal secret mass bombing campaigns in Cambodia and Laos that killed hundreds of thousands of civilians and his government's role in the slaughter of Vietnamese people. resulting in at least 3.8 million people killed, according to a joint report from Howard University and the University of Washington. Even higher casualties, according to investigative journalist Nick Turse. Nixon wasn't held accountable for what the then President Lyndon Johnson privately blasted as treason when he discovered that the yet to be elected Republican candidate for president and his future national security advisor Henry Kissinger were deliberately and illegally sabotaging Johnson's peace negotiations in Vietnam, ultimately prolonging the war for another 4 years. Articles of impeachment against Nixon were passed by the House Judiciary Committee. Articles 1 and 3 focused on allegations related to Watergate and Nixon's failure to deal properly with the congressional investigations. Now, Article 2 related to allegations of violations of citizens' civil liberty and abuse of government power. They became moot once Nixon resigned, and in the end, the disgraced former president didn't face charges related to Watergate. A month after Nixon left office, President Gerald Ford pardoned him for all offenses against the United States that he committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period from January 20th of 1969 until his resignation on August 9th of 1974. This pardon cemented into place the imperial presidency. It entrenched the modern notion of elite immunity, as the constitutional lawyer and journalist Glenn Greenwald notes. Neither Republican nor Democrats want to set a precedent that might hamstring the unchecked and unaccountable power of a future squatter or president. The most serious crimes are those that are normalized by the power elite, regardless of who initiated them. George W. Bush may have started the wars in the Middle East, but Barack Obama maintained and expanded it. Obama's crowning achievement may have been the Iran nuclear deal, but Biden, his former vice president, hasn't reversed Trump's trashing of it, nor has he reversed the decision by Trump to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in violation of international law. Now, Trump, like most of his opponents in the Republican and Democratic parties, serves the interests of the billionaire class. He too is hostile to the rights of workers. He too is an enemy of the press. He too backs the diversion of hundreds of billions of federal dollars to the war industry to maintain that empire. He too does not respect the rule of law. He too is personally and politically corrupt, but he is also impulsive, bigoted, inept, ignorant, and racist. His baseless conspiracy theories, vulgarity, and absurd antics are an embarrassment to the established power elite and the true ruling party. He is difficult, unlike Biden, to control. He has to go, and not because he is a criminal, but because he is not trusted by the ruling crime syndicate to manage the firm. So if you like the video, you can give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RW King. You can also hit the subscribe so you can get notifications. Also hit the subscribe button and also hit the notification bell so you can be notified when a new video comes out. And if you want to support my work even further, you can donate to my Patreon link, which you can find in the About section of YouTube. And for just a little as a few bucks a month, your donation can help go a long way. And also leave a comment, let me know what you think. And have a good day, and thanks for listening.